Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing the album Space Revolver by the band The Flower Kings. Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog. I'm not gonna elaborate too much right now, but for anyone who's following this series in real time, you know of the journey that I've had with this band. You know what led up to this moment right now, reviewing this album, and by God, I'm pretty happy that it's over now. But anyways, let me finish this off and start reviewing this album, but first, here's some of my favorite bits from this album. So yes, the road to salvation is a long and painful one, but in another 4 days my soul will finally be liberated from this quest of prog conquest. But of course, a mere moment before I finish off this series, I have to battle my greatest foe from the list so far, face to face, and of course it's no other than a band that I've become notorious for disliking, and that band being the Flower Kings. So a lot of you watching this mainly in real time might remember that not too long ago, from a standpoint of just pure frustration and maybe some incompetence, I decided that I wanted to take off one of the 4 The Flower Kings albums that resided on the list. And when it came down to it, we only had 2 albums left, and I gave you all the viewers the choice on a live stream to choose which album was gonna be taken down, whether that be 2000 Space Revolver or 2020's Island. And well, while over on the Prog Archives these 2 albums seem to have pretty matching and balanced ratings to one another, you guys took it by a landslide to vote out Islands, and thus today's album Space Revolver was kept on the list. And with that being said, it's not really you guys saying that it's a good album, you're just saying that it's better than Islands. So going into this album today, I actually genuinely wanted to create this the best experience that I could manage from this. So what I did at first was just kind of meditate myself into a state of thinking that maybe, just maybe, I will forget everything that I know about this band and all the preconceptions that I have about them and how much I dislike their sound, and just come into this like this is the first time I'm ever listening to the Flower Kings and hoping that maybe it will yield some good results. And secondly, honestly, I just went ahead into this album not taking things too seriously. If there's one thing that I know that I'm doing and it's really bad, is after I have a bad experience with a band, I become overly critical of it the next time I encounter it. And well, I had a pretty negative experience with this band already 2 times, so coming into this one I could have been overly critical, and stuff that I would have never really pointed out in other bands' music I would immediately jot down in my notebook saying that this is the worst thing I've ever heard. So I just tried to be kind of calm, kind of relaxed, and just flow with this one and see where it takes me. And of course this was all helped before getting into this album, seeing that this album was a mere 75 minutes of runtime. I'm saying like mere 75 minutes because it's still quite long, but it's nowhere near the absurd lengths of the 2 other albums that we listened to, being Unfold the Future and Stardust We Are, which both of them are like 2 hours at least. But if I had something else that was concerning me, was the fact that this album today was basically released just in between these 2, with a gap of 1 album to each side. This album basically came in the middle between the 2 albums I just mentioned, so the possibilities of this one one sounding anywhere different from the two other albums were kind of slim, but again, I just tried meditating myself back down to earth and reviewing this one as objectively as I could. So the album Space Revolver opens up with the first part of a bigger track that opens and concludes the album called I Am the Sun. And while listening to this one, at first I really didn't know what to think of it, but honestly by the end of this one I have to say this song kind of really slaps. I don't think that I Am the Sun, specifically part 1, is a perfect track to say the least, and it is a bit longer than I would have liked, and it does have some forgettable moments, but honestly it finally seems to me like the band is doing things right on here. They have some really interesting musical ideas carried away by orchestral arrangements, which I personally really enjoy, and they just kind of go all over the place and it sounds really good. The solos themselves are good, the musicianship level is good, and the overall chemistry even feels kind of nice. Yes, I think that my criticism from the past of this band trying to mimic other bands, especially the sound of Yes, does still persist to this song, but not to the same degrees as other songs and albums that I've listened from theirs. While this one might not be the most innovative song ever, I don't think that it has to be, and as long as it gets things right and it changes things up, it's honestly pretty nice, and I enjoy the eclecticness of this one, and as I said, it really does slap. Now the follow-up song to this one is called Dream of a Dreamer. Now it does feel like a song taken right out of a dream, with the saxophone solo, the ominous keyboards, the vocals, and of course the bass on here. It's a really neat track. I think it's a bit too short and I'm not the biggest fan of the vocals themselves, but honestly I do think that it's also quite good. But the only reason I mentioned this track, to be honest, was to segue to the third track on the album, which is called Rumble Fish Twist. It's an odd name, but as I see it, this might be the most important track on this album, and honestly maybe even in the entire The Flower Kings discography. Now just for context, this song is entirely instrumental, and by the sound of things it sounds like it was taken from a live recording, though I couldn't find any evidence stating from where and when. But the fact of the matter is, this track is filled with a bunch of alien-like music. It's not too alien, but it just kinda is out there in many ways, and it has all the band members, all the 6 existing members that play on here, soloing out and doing different things. But the reason I'm saying that this might be the most important track on this band's entire discography is, well, because they finally sound like themselves. Freaking finally, a song by the Flower Kings that doesn't sound like they're trying to imitate someone, and instead they're just doing what they like doing, showing off their skill, showing off who they are in the most sincere way, and honestly, I love it. And yes, I would link the fact that this is a live recording to the fact that this sounds more free, more loose, and more personal to some extent. Maybe just being around the studio and having Ronja Stoltz just go ahead and jot many ideas down on paper, not letting anyone edit them down and putting them all into one record, and it sounding kinda cheap and mimicky at the end, is a product of just being inside of a studio. But then when coming outdoors, when performing live, apparently this band can perform some really interesting things that are definitely unique only to them. Now I will be a bit hypocritical on here. I wouldn't say that this one is my favorite track from the album, but as I said, I still do see the significance of a track like this, and I'm so happy that it made it on this album. But when it comes down to it, yes, my perfect track from the album has to be the first one, I Am the Sun Part 1, though I Am the Sun Part 2 is actually genuinely also really good. Now before we get into that one, I do believe that the rest, I think 6 tracks on the album, they're good. They're not as good as what came before them. They kind of sound like Moon Safari, but in a different sense, seeing that this album came out in the year of 2000 and Moon Safari only founded in 2003 leads me to believe that yes, the Flower Kings probably have influenced the Moon Safari sound quite a bit, especially with this album. But coming into the last track on this album being I Am the Sun Part 2, it's a really good song. It continues off the first part excellently. It sounds really good, and in my personal opinion, while it might be a bit shorter and more condensed in its overall sound, I do think that I better like the ideas presented on the first part, and thus it is my favorite. But honestly, if I see myself coming to this one, I'll come back to the entire first and second parts of this one because they seem to me like a great ride to listen to one after the other. But yeah, much like the experience I've had with Neo Prog, which was overly negative throughout most of the year, I feel like my last encounter with the genre was definitely more positive, and that being Frequency by IQ. And when it comes to the Flower Kings, well, I can finally say that I've listened to an album of theirs that doesn't sound bad, is not too long, and honestly sees a bit of glimpses from the real band themselves, and I can say that this is a pretty average album, but for the Flower Kings, this is a great compliment. But if there's one thing that the Flower Kings never really seemed to be able to do was to generate a decent enough cover. You know, I'm not asking for a masterpiece, but just a decent enough cover. And yes, for everyone shaking their head at this one, I think that the cover for By the Royal Decree is actually really bad. And of course, this wouldn't be a Flower Kings review if I didn't diss on this band even a bit. But yeah, my personal issue with this cover is seeing that it just doesn't really relate to the album itself. The Flower Kings have always had something with space, and especially with a title like Space Revolver, so you do get some space, but honestly you just get this big flower on the cover and it doesn't represent the music one bit, and that's just kind of unfortunate because I really think that a good cover is integral for any album and for any artist who really wants to show some degree of respect to the music that they've created. So for what it's worth, not a really memorable one, but not that bad too. But yeah, this album is gonna get probably what is the most abundant rating I've given out this year, and while for most bands it would mean that the album is pretty average to good, for this band it's just a really promising thing. It shows that they can produce some fine pieces of music that, you know, they're just average, I guess. So yeah, this album is gonna get a rating of 7 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're gonna be listening to the album Asia by the band Asia. Yeah, I know, I'm excited too. But of course I want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Wan, Rest of Kings, and Lindsay. Hey Cox, you guys are just the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.